to the MPART Citizens Advisory Work Group. First time in a Microsoft Teams format. And so, Jim, do you want to talk a little bit, anything else about some of the hints and housekeeping about using this platform? It's a little different than what we did with the webinars in the past, but it's once you've used it, in my opinion, it's a lot more conducive to a dialogue with the participants.
Yeah, Steve, it's pretty much open for people to see what's going on. So housekeeping wise, you please keep your mic muted. And to do that, you just click on the little, when you move your mouse, you'll see this icon come up. Just click it and it'll look like this when you're muted. Unmute yourself when it's time to talk. For like these types of meetings, it's easiest if we just use the chat function, which is right here. I mean, if you want to chat there, that's fine. Sometimes it's hard because, you know, Steve and Kelly and all of us got to keep an eye on that chat, but we'd like to keep the chat to a minimum. That way we don't have people chatting back and forth amongst themselves and things like that. Just keep it all open, because we will start the recording here in just a minute if we haven't started already. And the recording is not going to capture necessarily all the chat stuff. So we don't want to chat too much, just, you know. Kelly's going to start recording in just a minute. Cameras, you can just click the little camera icon, turn your camera on if you want. You don't have to, but it is nice to see each other when we can. That's why we're doing this one. And that's all that I have, Steve.
Well, all right, Jim. Well, thank you for that. And let me see if I can get my slides up here. And so hopefully you folks can see the slide deck that I'm starting to run right now. And I appreciate the housekeeping tips. Does anybody have any questions for Jim on using this format?
Oh yeah, you can click the raise hand icon too, and Kelly and I and Steve will keep an eye out for raised hands.
Yeah, thanks. And that's a good point. Is when I'm sharing my screen, I can't really see, or there may be a way to do it, but when I'm showing my slides, I can't really see who's raising their hand. So, you know, Kelly and Jim will be watching that and interrupting to make sure that folks have a chance to interject as close to a dialogue as possible. So, all right, well, if there's no questions getting started into the meeting, here's the agenda. And by the way, the slides were attached to the meeting invite, so you all should have that, especially for those of you who are participating just via phone. And so we're just on the third slide that lays out the agenda, pretty full agenda, and didn't know if anybody had any additions to this that we need to make sure that we get in. All right, I think we will have no problem filling in the next 90 minutes or so. All right, so let's move on now. And Nina, are you on?
Steve, before we go to Nina, can we see who called in so we can make sure that we have them listed as attending?
Yeah, so if I stop trying to figure out how to get back to that part of it. Wow, so what's showing now?
Who has the phone number that starts with 231?
I have a phone number that starts with 231. It's David Lipscomb.
Thank you, David.
Hey, David.
And how about 248?
This is Tony Spaniola. I'm on the phone now, but I should be joining on video here in the next 5-10 minutes.
Tony.
Awesome. Hi, Tony.
269.
Hi. Gail Dugan, 207-4120.
And the 517 number, I'm assuming, is Kevin.
I can hear his turn signal. Perfect. And yeah, so if you didn't catch it earlier, if you hit that little bar in the middle of your screen, and then you can show the participants or hide that list. Gives you an idea who's all on there, and from the MPART team, you can even see which agencies they're from. So I appreciate some of our MPART members taking some time to join and listen in and participate as well.
One that I missed was 586.
That's me, Dave Wynn.
Thank you, Dave.
Hey, David.
Okay, that wraps it up.
All right, so probably have to get back to sharing. And you are recording now, right, Kelly?
Yes.
All right, so do you see my screen now?
Yes.
All right. Well, that was pretty smooth. We'll get better at it, Jim. All right, so, and again, I don't know if, Nina, have you joined?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, perfect. So would you like to control the slides, or you want me just to do it for you?
Sure, I can do that. I'll request control right now.
And I have to say allow. There we go. So it should be you.
All right. Well, good evening, and thanks for inviting me, Steve. So from what I understand, you already shared a link to the website, the Clean Water website, right?
Right after the last meeting, Nina, we kicked it out to the group and said that you were interested in some feedback from them at today's meeting, plus anything else you wanted to share and talk about. So we really appreciate you joining.
Great. Thanks for having me. So I think we'll start off with any feedback that you all had about the website. I'll kind of preface it with saying this was, again, phase 1 of the launch. So the intent is to really just give an overview of the Office of the Clean Water Public Advocate, and then also provide some basic water quality information. I'm really hoping that the Clean Water ambassadors and other partners will help develop and kind of inform the material that we add to this site. And I also see this site serving as a hub. So it'll include MDHHS material as well as EGLE and other state departments. So really linking to that information, but this can be, a central location for most residents, if they choose. So with that background, I'm open to your questions, comments, any feedback that you have about the website, and then I'll follow that up with some updates for the rest of the year.
All right, and I can't see if anybody's raising their hands, and maybe the first thing is see how many folks had a chance to take a look at what she's put out there. Did anybody have a chance and any initial impressions even?
Well, and that's okay. If you haven't had a chance to review it, definitely take a look and provide any feedback that you have via email. Steve has my email address, and it's also on the last slide of the deck. But I'm really interested in your feedback, and just, again, I want this site to really serve as a hub for information and providing that basic water quality information, and then also ways that they can connect to other sites that are pre-existing.
This is AJ Burkbeck. Steve, I'm not sure. I don't see a raised hand. Maybe I'm just not looking in the right spot.
It's right next, and if you look at the toolbar in the middle of your screen, it'll be right next to the 3 dots. Right next to the 3 dots. I think so. If it's not, let me know.
On mine it says show conversation right next to the 3 dots.
Oh, maybe some people don't have it, Steve.
Oh, I wonder if that matters what kind of PC you have or something.
I really don't know, but there is a raised hand next to some people. I don't know. That's good to know.
Try clicking on the 3 dots.
Yeah.
Got 3 dots. It just says show device settings, meeting details, full screen, keypad, and turn off incoming. So I don't see it. Anyhow, I just I wanted to I guess have a kind of a general question. I looked at the site and Certainly seems to have a lot of good information, including some of the information that we've discussed before of, with all these sites coming on, a PFAS 101 kind of primer. And I guess my general question is, to what extent is this going to overlap or be duplicative of the MPART site? Because I think there's the potential, at least, to cause some confusion amongst folks who aren't really sure which site to look at.
So that's a very good question, and I'm glad that you brought that up. So, I mentioned before, I really want this site to serve as a hub. And so we're not trying to recreate the information that's on the MPART site. And the only way that we would maybe have a page that, a page sort of like a precursor to linking to that is if we felt like it was a little bit too technical for some residents. So if we felt like we needed to kind of provide some background information here in the context and more context, then we would provide that on the Clean Water site and then link to that specific content on the MPART side. So I think a lot of the changes and updates and modifications that we do are really going to be driven based on what residents, need and what they say that, they want to supplement what's pre-existing. So anything that we do to supplement what's there, again, is going to be driven by the feedback that we get from residents. And of course, I'm definitely going to check in with you all because I don't want this to be confusing, to residents and feel like there's two standalone sites. I really want there to be linkage in showing that, hey, this is where you find this information. In addition to MPART, there's also the MyLet Safe page. And in the same way, we're kind of setting up and saying, hey, go to this page or go to this site for more information about the lead and copper rules. So again, it's really just a way of kind of setting up that content so that they know that these different sites exist if they were to just come to the Clean Water site, beforehand, before they knew that your site exists, essentially.
Okay, because it appears as though what's on the Clean Water site is largely educational. It's like an FAQ. Like, is there a funny taste in my water? Is this related to PFAS? So I think that's very helpful, and it doesn't really seem duplicative of MPART's, which is, this is what our investigation has shown. This is where we have actually found PFAS. And it seems like your site doesn't really go to that information. So I guess the key would be how to integrate the two. And I'm commenting on this because I'm involved in the subcommittee for web content for the MPART, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later on. But we talk, about the need for having essentially an FAQ, and it looks like, this addresses a lot of questions that kind of came up. And so then the real question becomes how to integrate this into the MPART website so that people can easily transition if they're going from one to the other. And on your site, maybe, if you want more information about specific investigations, here's a link over to the MPART site. Right.
I think the best way to think about the Clean Water site is it's sort of that intro to the other site. So it provides that background information that kind of, sorry, not sure why that's echoing, but that 101 type information or background context before linking to those more technical sites. So I'd love to be connected and, knowing that you have a team that's dedicated to, the content that's on the MPART site, I'll definitely add that to our engagement strategy. So as we're thinking of what are the next steps with the Clean Water site and what do we want to add and what are we hearing that residents want more information about, I can definitely connect with you because I agree. These are something that should be connected and there shouldn't, I don't want them to be disjointed in any way.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments?
Steve, Gail Dugan.
Yeah, Gail.
What is the level of interest of becoming an ambassador? Can you gauge that level of interest on your site, or hasn't it really got rolling yet?
So this is Nina. Are you referring to the Clean Water Ambassador Initiative?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so I guess that's the perfect segue to our next slide. So the initiative was actually launched last month, so in June, and we have about 115 clean water ambassadors across the state, really representing a lot of the different, communities throughout the state. So we're going to have our first webinar in July. And I'm thinking the more that we kind of dive into, what the ambassador is going to do in terms of projects, I'm sure that we're going to pick up more. But we at least have about, like I mentioned before, like 115 so far.
Will there be any coalition or some working together with other people that are in different areas, like Pam and I are in Otsego? Will your clean water ambassador work with us and on different projects down here, or will that happen over the entire state?
I think there'll be areas where, it may be more community driven based on what's going on there. I really look at this as an opportunity to just bring in all of the different partners in one pool and say, hey, how can we make sure that we're engaging folks in the community, whether they're activists or a community resident, making sure that we're giving them information and that they're involved in the process. So yes, to answer your question, if there's something specific to a community, I see them saying, hey, I want to know what's going on here. And we would invite you, to talk about that specific project, or if there's something going on, invite you to the webinar, our monthly webinars, where you talk about this is what's going on in my community, and see if there's again an opportunity for them to either utilize their resources to help or provide some feedback. I would say overall there's going to be some general statewide projects that they're going to help with, like our online drinking water concerns form, where they'll really help gauge, from a resident or just a community perspective, the usability of that form. They'll take a look at like our school drinking water program and let us know feedback in terms of how we can improve the uptake for that. What are some things that they think would be helpful for schools and communities to know? So I see the clean water ambassadors, again, being able to help on a lot of different initiatives and a lot of different programs. It's all about feeding that information through to this group.
Thank you very much.
No problem. So I'll utilize this time to just kind of talk you through this slide. Like I mentioned before, we launched our Clean Water Ambassador Initiative last month. I'm really excited about, the numbers that we're getting so far. I'm getting a lot of emails that people are excited and really wanting to partake in this initiative. They have a lot of great thoughts and feedback in terms of what they feel like is important and what we need to tackle. But they're also excited, again, about the things that I've preluded, like the online drinking water concern form and how they can be helpful in that. In addition to launching that, I've been working with different communities on specific projects. And for example, in Benton Harbor, I've been working with their lead outreach. They've had their fourth action level exceedance, and a lot of struggle. They have, quite a few struggles with just making sure that community residents are informed about the resources that are available in their community, where they can find accurate information about lead information. So I've been working with state, local, and community-based partners just to make sure that we have clear messaging. We have developed a really great strategy in terms of just disseminating that, especially with the challenges of COVID, and knowing that we can't just have this larger forum and getting folks together. And I really appreciated the work there. Again, as I'm kind of visiting different communities and seeing where I can be supportive, I'll be sharing that information on the website, because I think there's a lot of lessons learned from each of these different communities that may be impactful and useful for other communities. So that's just one example of the community efforts that I've been working on. And then I've mentioned at least 3 times during this call about our online drinking water concern system. And that's because I'm really excited about this. So early this fall, we will be launching our online drinking water concern form. And essentially what that is if a resident experienced a drinking water quality issue and they've already reached out to their local municipal water system and they've experienced any delays or concerns, and they would typically call, Eagle's call center. Well, now they have another way to do that we hope will increase usability and access. And that's our online drinking concern form, where they would enter their information there. It has this cool feature if you use it from your phone where you can drop your pen and say, this is where the issue is. It would really allow us to look at this data comprehensively and map it. In addition, as residents maybe call their district staff or call the call center, we'll be using this same tool to make sure all that data is in one centralized place. But from a user aspect, again, it helps with accessibility in terms of submitting your online concern, but it also has a dashboard feature that I'm really excited about, so that you can see where these different concerns are and how they are throughout the state, and see, maybe there's a water discoloration issue in a certain part of the state, and you can kind of see what communities are impacted by that, or whatever, category that they choose to file their complaint under. So again, I'm still doing the engagement piece on that. We have the forum. We're going to be taking that through some testing with the Clean Water Ambassadors, getting their feedback. I'd love for you all to take a look at it too, so I can definitely share that with Steve when we get to a better place with that in the next couple of weeks. But I really am excited, and I think this is going to be good for residents and partners, just to have this kind of unified approach and being able to see that, again, on a dashboard or on the map, and see how those complaints are dispersed. And then again, I think I mentioned before my annual accountability report, where I'll really look at, the drivers of, how are we improving water quality in Michigan, looking at, one second, computer doesn't want to act right now. Well, looking at, an engagement, investment, transparency, and enhancement. And so it'll be looking at how are we engaging community, how are we investing, what programs are available that are free to communities to be supportive, how are we investing grants and loans in communities. Transparency would look at, lead and copper data, how the LCR changes have impacted how we're testing, looking at some PFAS things that I'm going to connect with Steve about and see what will be helpful and useful for folks to see in this accountability report. And then any enhancements. And again, that will be like our online drinking water form, like the PFAS, MCLs. There's been an investment in the drinking water IT. So things like that, that again, show where we're moving, in the next few years. So that's pretty much all I have. I appreciate your time. Let me know if you have any questions, and then I'll be quiet.
Oh, well, and here's her information. You were probably trying to get to that page, Nina, and looks like I got control back or something.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Any other questions for Nina? All right. Well, hey, thank you very much for the update there and for sharing this information. And sound like it was a standing opportunity, Nina. If any of the members here have some more comments for you on the website, to just reach out to you direct.
Yes, please do so. Feel free to reach out and let me know your thoughts.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. All right. Well, let's move on to sites. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is, make routine as part of these meetings, just a quick update for you on the number of sites we have, and recognize the fact that each one of these sites does involve some sort of community outreach with those protocols that we've been sharing with you, and are looking for more recommendations from you on how we can do things better possibly. But since the last meeting, we didn't actually mention the U.S. Ecology one in Romulus by name, and so that's on the list here. But we have 95 sites total today, and others in the works, and these are the ones that are over the 70 part per trillion PFOS and PFOA, the current standard. And neither of the newer ones, electroplating services, this is the one with the green ooze down in Madison Heights, and City of Manistee, former landfill. Neither of these have any off-site drinking water concerns at this point. So both of those had basically an outreach call to local officials and the MPART team to brief them on the work of MPART, PFAS, health effects, and next steps at these locations. So, and of course, those, if you are getting the MPART updates, you saw each one of those individually in a release from MPART that the information has been posted on the web. So we talked last time a little bit about the expanding universe when we have new MCLs, PFAS MCLs, and
Steve,
yes.
it looks like Connie Boris has a question.
Yeah, it's Connie. Maybe, Connie, are you on mute?
Yeah, Connie, you're muted. I can unmute her. Yeah, she's got to unmute herself. So just remember at the middle of the screen, it's right here. It's a little button that's microphone. Just unmute yourself. Oh.
All right. Well, Connie, we can get back to you if your computer cooperates. All right. Well, I'll get started back on this then, but please do jump in, Connie, when you've got that mic open back up. But here really just wanted to update you on the fact that yes, we are going to have lower standards or lower levels of PFOA and PFOS allowed in groundwater under the state's cleanup program once we have PFAS MCLs. And so I think Ian Smith was on. Ian, if you wanted just to provide an update on where the MCLs are in the promulgation process, I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm happy to do it, but I figured I'd give you an opportunity.
Sure, Steve, thanks.
Thank
Hey, everybody.
You.
And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong here. I didn't prepare anything, so hopefully I get this correct. So the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, rulemaking, they had 15 days with which they could review the rules. They have utilized 14 of those session days. So at this point in time, sorry, I'm getting some feedback. Is somebody...
If everybody could go on mute if you're not actually talking right now.
Yeah, Steve, I think if it's people on the phone too, so make sure if you're on the phone, mute yourself on your end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this point in time, JCAR has gotten to 14 out of those 15 days. The legislature has gone on their summer break. They have session days scheduled for the third week of July. So at this point in time, I believe we're expecting the 15th day to occur at that point. July 22nd, I believe, is the date. And we'll be looking at promulgation on or around August 1st. Does that sound right, Steve?
That's what I've got in my footnotes too, Ian, is it's possible that next week could be a big week that would then trigger final promulgation, and then we're going to have new rules and first time here in Michigan for PFAS MCLs for 7 of them, right?
Correct.
Awesome. So I know this group has really been interested in getting those rules through, and everybody recognizes kind of the pandemic has stalled things a little bit, but potentially we could have them, though. Everybody, the bottom line is next month, and Ian did a really good job and Chris in the past talking about what do these rules mean. And so but for purposes here of the sites discussion, shortly thereafter, under Part 201, we'll have new standards for groundwater cleanups for protective of drinking water for PFOA and PFOS. And as we talked before, there's going to be a new universe of facilities that, almost like flipping a switch, will become official MPART sites, because as you recall from the previous screen, we just basically make them official when they exceed state criteria. And that mantra going forward is going to give us roughly in the neighborhood of around 40 sites. And that ebbs and flows based upon new information that we're finding out between now and whenever we actually have to make this announcement of what these locations are. And but we want to make sure that we're transparent with the communities and make sure that everybody knows what we're doing, but also equally important that we'll try to make this as seamlessly transparent and work these into our processes in MPART. And so there's a couple of things, though, that we talked about last time that we've kind of come a little bit further on after talking with, the local public health advisory committee. We've talked more and more with our MPART team, is honing in on those 40 some odd facilities that actually have groundwater contamination confirmed. And these doesn't mean necessarily that offsite receptors are potentially going to be exposed, that these are just those locations that have contamination exceeding PFOA 8 parts per trillion, PFOS 16 parts per trillion. And, we had talked in the past about another 30 some odd sites that are those middle tier public water supplies that have been monitored on a quarterly basis over the past year or two, and some of their levels may exceed those criteria, and how best to address those. And I think the conversation has evolved is that the drinking water program will proceed to oversee both those supplies themselves and whether that triggers any investigations in the communities around them. So all that information will be out there, but we were a little concerned if we kind of bunch them with these 40, that people might think those water supplies are contaminated sites, when in fact they're not. If at most they're the victim likely of some contamination in the area. So first and foremost, that's one of the changes. And then secondly, we talked about doing regional webinars to make sure that we got out right off the bat with the communities and identified, here's all these sites, and gave people an opportunity for at least a little back and forth with our project leads. And I think at this point, though, we're looking now to do one big regional webinar for all of northern Michigan, because there's only a handful of sites there. So that's UP, Gaylord, Cadillac area. But then once you get to lower Michigan, each Eagle district would have a webinar, and the maximum number of sites I think is Grand Rapids at 10. But basically, to hold a webinar, do the typical town hall type webinar we do that says, here's what PFAS are, here's what the health effects are, here's what MPART's doing about this statewide, here's why we're talking to you now, because you are now an official site, you have an official site in your community, here's what we know about these sites. And by the way, if and when we find the need to actually investigate private wells off-site for potential exposures, we'll hold a community-specific webinar at that point in time. And but then offer some opportunity. We'll have our staff from the agencies available for some at least brief Q&A on the sites that are subject to that webinar. And of course, anybody can participate in any webinar, but we'll try to make those focused for those specific regions so that at least those people in those communities have an opportunity. So that's kind of where we are right now. I want to stop right there and just see if anybody has any further thoughts, comments on this. It's been something we've been talking about for a couple of months now. Potentially this announcement could be coming out in early August based upon what Ian just told us.
Steve, AJ does have a question about JCAR.
Yep. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks. And it was an excellent lead, because that's what my question was, which is on the 22nd, you mentioned promulgation. It sounds like it'd probably be a couple of weeks after that, before then it becomes an actual regulation that's enforceable, not only with respect to MCLs, but with respect to PFOS and PFOA, groundwater cleanup standards as well under Part 201. Are the MCLs and Part 201 going to be roughly the same time? And is that something that is in fact a couple of weeks?
Yeah, and Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, but once the 15 days, session days has been met, then the Michigan Office of Administrative Hearings and Rules can file the rule set with the Secretary of State, and then 7 days thereafter is when they can become effective. And so that's that August 1 date, plus or minus in there. But then at the same point in time, AJ, to your point, they pretty much overwrite groundwater standards for those contaminants where we already have criteria. And we only have them for PFOA and PFOS. And so those two would be overwritten by the MCLs.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Yeah, and one other question maybe I have asked at first. Have you heard any rumblings from the legislature of opposition? I guess there's only one day where they can kind of hop in and oppose, but has there been any indication that you folks have heard that either the MCLs or the Part 201 standards that will come from those are causing enough heartburn that there could be a delay?
Well, I can tell you what I do know, and is that the chair of the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules did send a letter to Director Clark, and forgive me if I've told some of you this before, just asking some questions on how we handled comments and how Eagle handled the comments received from anybody during the formal public comment period. And and we responded to those questions, and so I haven't heard anything else back from that. I think, for lack of a better way to say it, the chair was doing his due diligence with constituents that had been talking with him, just to make sure that we did give due consideration to the comments that were submitted. And I think those came primarily from MMA, wondering, did we fully consider all of their comments? And we went through very deliberate process, as you know, going all the way back to when the health-based values as the foundation for the rules were developed. That was a very public process, and then went to industry stakeholder groups, you all and others, to get some input on developing the draft rules before they were submitted. Had a couple of briefings for the Environmental Rules Review Committee, and and basically at one point in time considered all, reviewed everything that had been submitted before the actual rule set was submitted formally into MOHAR, and came back as MPART and said, yep, these are the right health-based values to proceed with. We did that all very publicly. And then Ian oversaw the process for managing the comments submitted during the formal review period, including, asking MPART to take a look at all the comments based upon, that were on the health-based values. And we went, Ian's folks looked at all of those, and then we went to the MPART's Human Health Work Group with toxicologists from 4 departments. And then as well went back to the actual Science Advisory Work Group and asked them, hey, here are some new comments, and what are your thoughts on these? Just to make sure that everybody was still on the same page. So we think we had a really defensible process, but I haven't heard anything else back from that. Ian, did you hear anything else?
I have not, Steve.
Okay.
Thanks.
So fingers crossed.
And I'd spoken to several JCAR members, including the chair, and I would say I didn't encounter really anything negative, but there was a fairly high level of, I guess, lack of knowledge with some of them, and I think that inquiry to you with respect to the comments that were received, because I was asked, how many positive and negative, and I didn't have a quick answer for that off the cuff. But again, we hadn't really heard anything negatives. So that's all very promising, and I hope we get something here in the next couple of weeks. It's been a long process. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. And as you all can imagine, we received comments on both sides of the coin, so to speak, on whether or not the regulations were too stringent or not stringent enough. And all those comments were considered through the process. So I think we got a really defensible lane to be in right now, and we'll be looking forward to MCL shortly.
Steve,
all right.
David
Yep.
Wynn has his hand up.
Yeah, David. Go ahead. And Kelly, can you tell if he's on mute?
Yeah, he's muted right now, so he's got to unmute himself.
You're stuck on mute there, David.
And we can't unmute people. You got to unmute yourselves.
All right. Well, David, go ahead.
Steve, just a reminder too, if there are those people that are just on the phone, I think you guys are all muted now. So if you want to unmute yourselves, you have to hit *6 on your phone. *6 will mute and unmute you on the phone.
Okay, Steve, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes. Perfect.
Okay. I'd like a little better for clarification on this map. The blue dots, it says non-PFAS sites exceeding future MTLs. Can you explain to me what that is?
Yeah, and I'm not going to oversell the nomenclature that we're using right now. It was just to distinguish locations where we've identified groundwater contamination that doesn't exceed the current official criteria of 70 parts per trillion. So, in various iterations of putting lists together, I said, well, they're not PFAS sites today, but they do exceed those future MCLs, which will become the groundwater cleanup criteria and make them a PFAS site.
So these are going to be 40 additional sites on top of the ones that are already current.
Right. So if this happened today, we'd have 135 instead of 95.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Yep. Oh, good point. And apologies for any confusion on the nomenclature. Eventually, they'll all just be called sites, and and that's why we've been wrestling with how best to be as transparent as possible and adapt our protocols, because normally we do these one at a time, but we're going to have 40 that officially become sites, and that's why we're looking at doing these district or region-wide announcements, at least to get the initial word out. And I guess another point on this too is that many of you are familiar with locations where we had really high concentrations, and those were really high priority to get out and investigate groundwater. These will all be prioritized, and I think we talked about this before. Our district staff are prioritizing this first and foremost for anywhere we might have a concern with offsite migration. So there may not be a lot of work at some of these that might be at 9 parts per trillion PFOA if we're not concerned about offsite migration for quite some time, just given capacity, workload, and making sure that we're being the most protective of whoever might be exposed to the worst concentrations.
Thank you.
Yep. And so I'll stop there for a minute, because Connie, I don't know if you were participating with your phone too, and if that, what Jim Ostrowski mentioned, would help you unmute.
I think I'm unmuted, correct? Can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you now.
Oh, well, that's good. Okay, a couple of questions. What are those 2 sites in Wayne County that borders Washtenaw? Are those landfills or quarries?
So U.S. Ecology Romulus, that's a aqueous waste, liquid waste treatment facility, and with tanks and whatnot. But they've been regulated in the past, and they integrated PFAS testing into their monitoring network and found it over the concentration. So this one's, I think, at the southwest end of the airport. I could be off a little bit. I haven't been working on this one for a while. But again, no private wells, residential wells, groundwater uses for drinking water in the area. EPS, Electroplating Services, is actually in Oakland County, Madison Heights. It's right there off of the expressway. Do you remember the green ooze coming out onto I-696? That's this location.
Yeah, the two sites you're showing, though, are right in Washtenaw, and electroplating is not there. It is not near Washtenaw. It's 696. So that's why I'm confused. We really should have a listing of the sites by county, so we
Yes.
know what their addresses are. And the other key thing, I mean, Wayne County is the most industrial site in the industrial county in the whole entire state of Michigan. Yet there has been no PFAS testing whatsoever at Metro Airport and the adjacent landfill owned by Waste Management called Woodland Meadows. It's two previous landfills, which are also Woodland Meadows, which do not have a liner, which are rampant with PFAS. And where's all this going? Into the Rouge River, the lower Rouge, and then whammo into the Detroit River. What I am amazed is how Eagle and probably us at MPART are not doing due diligence on the sites that are in Wayne County. And we have the most landfills of any county in the entire state, yet nobody's looking at it. And we have the most population exposed to PFAS. And Eagle is not doing anything about it.
You know, that makes me think what might be helpful for you and the rest of the team here is perhaps the September agenda. We can bring in Jim Arduin or someone else from our materials management division that oversees the landfills. What they've done is they've prioritized the investigations of landfills across the state and kind of put them in 3 tiers. One of them is the highest level tier, which is already, there's like 45 of them, where we knew there were releases of other things in groundwater from these landfills, because like you say, all the old ones leaked. It's the new cells that don't, but a lot of them are associated with new cells. And so, we've already hit those, and now we're on the second tier of ones where we're not so sure there's necessarily an off-site impact. And then the last tier is ones where we don't know of a groundwater release or any off-site impact. So priority 1 was making sure that we're protecting drinking water. And so that's the first group of landfills that was addressed. And again, as all 45 of them have been hit, and I think we've got results for almost all of those now. But we could have Jim come in and talk with you about how they prioritize those and what the results are. Because we found PFAS in all landfill leachate, pretty much. If it's a municipal solid waste landfill, has PFAS in leachate. And so I can't tell you right now how many are in Wayne County that we've already hit, but to your point on, getting a list of locations based upon, by county, if you go out onto the MPART website and look under investigations, all of that is all done by county as well. So if you see for Wayne County, you'll see all the ones that are listed for that, and for the rest of the state as well by county.
Yeah. I did talk to him probably about 3 months ago. But at that time, I wasn't aware that 2 of the Woodland Meadows landfills did not have a liner on it. And you have people fishing on the Rouge River. You had 2 big hits of PFAS in Wyandotte. The Rouge goes right past there. It hit their drinking water system. So I just think we need to have a lot more emphasis on what's going on in Wayne County, mostly due to the landfills, especially Waste Management's Woodland Meadows landfill.
Yeah, I think both of those right across the road from each other are landfills that were closed because I think at least one of them didn't have a liner, and that was the reason for its closure. But you're right, a lot of the landfills in the state have old cells that we know have been problematic. So, but I think it'd be helpful to have Jim come in, and then I did Mike Alexander follow up with you on what's been going on in the Rouge?
Well, yeah, he did. But when I looked at the Rouge River data, it's pathetic. There were only 2 samples taken. One was in stream downriver, and the other one downstream in the Detroit River. And then 2 samples right at the mouth of the Rouge. You're really missing the boat on your sampling locations. And so I talked to somebody else other than Mike. It was Dawn, somebody or another, and I begged to have sampling done below these landfills where they are entering the Lower Rouge. There's no river more polluted than the Lower Rouge. And he said he would send me a draft for the sampling plan, but I have not received.
Yeah, my guess is that they're still trying to develop that next plan. And and Mike was explaining where they are in the process of that. But yeah, it's a stepwise process, investigations and prioritize. But I think what you found from what Mike sent to you is that we actually went into the Rouge when we started finding contamination in some surface water intakes like Wyandotte, and trying to figure out why. And so we haven't found, a significant amount of contamination with PFAS, but we're still looking and laying out that plan, including additional fish studies as well. So, but yeah, I would say stay tuned for that plan from Mike, because that sounds like that's still under development.
About the Lansing folks here is you should really listen a little bit to the local folks, because we kind of know where some of those sites are. And I provided to him a couple of areas I really think he should be sampling. But like I say, I think there needs to be more of a joint partnership with the locals here than there is.
No, that's good input, and we'll make sure that gets back. Again, I'm not as close to how Water Resources puts those together on a routine basis, but I know that we've got district staff as well that are in tune with the communities, but it may not be as obvious of a process, but I'll take that back as well. That's important input.
Well, I think it's been years since they've done the Lower Rouge. A lot of years.
Okay. I appreciate that. And again, now we're in the process now of adding PFAS to what we had been doing all along, right? For some of these other persistent toxins.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
No, good input. I appreciate that. All right. Let me move on now and talk a little bit about one of the issues that we're coming across when we're adding more sites, these 40 more sites. It's not only that we're adding to the magnitude of what we're putting out on the web, but we're going to have to start talking about it a little differently. And so remember that the current criteria for groundwater contamination is 70 parts per trillion PFOS plus PFOA, any combination of that, right? Over 70 parts per trillion. And when we ultimately do switch, and I'll jump ahead here real quick, to different criteria, it's going to be individual. So we're going to have to start looking at reporting those a little bit differently. And so let me flip back again. So that was kind of like the first point. And so we are starting to refine, though, as well, the information that we've got out there for all of the new site write-ups. And so I'll ask Kelly if she wants to highlight anything on this, just because, we're trying to refine, get a little bit clearer, and then lead our way into a new reporting format for the new locations.
Yep. So all of the current sites that are on the website right now, this is the chart that we use. And when the MCLs are promulgated, this chart will be added to the historical timeline at the bottom for each of those site investigations so that we can retain those numbers on each site, and then will be converted over to the new table from the point that the MCLs are in effect moving forward.
And that's this one here, right?
Correct.
Yep.
So we're not going to go back through historical data to populate this new table. Historical data will be added to the timeline below, and from the point that the MCLs are promulgated, new data coming in will be captured in this format.
Right, and one point, when we had a conversation with our project leads about historical data, and do they or don't they need to go back and compare individual well results with the new criteria? And in some, the short answer is, well, yes, if it would change MPART's investigation strategy. If it wouldn't change MPART's investigation strategy, if we've already got everybody on some sort of alternate water, already defined, the sides, the plume, so to speak, then even though res well samples aren't necessarily used for defining plumes, then we won't go back and try to revive that data. But so again, we do want to make sure that we're cognizant of the fact that if there is data for wells that would change our strategy, that we do make sure that that's identified and make the community aware of any changes in our strategy. I don't know if that's going to be an issue in any specific community yet. And from talking with our project leads, they're thinking for the most part, no. Most homes have been put on a presumptive remedy while we define a plume. So we even have residents out there that are, non-detect, that have some sort of a filtration system, alternate water, while we're still out there working to define the plume, just because we're not sure whether it was going to go up or down. So any questions on this kind of new format? It's different than what everybody's used to looking at, right? So it's very different than this one, how we report things out. But again, it's basically because we have to report these differently because they're identified differently. And just want to make sure you're aware. And if you don't have any thoughts or comments on it now, but if something pops up, just let us know. But this is what Kelly is working on with all the project leads across the state, trying to make sure that we're ready to put this out on the web live when we announce all those new sites, maybe in August. All right. And I can't see if there's any hands raised. So Kelly, if I'm not hearing you say anything, I'm going to move on here. And I wanted to share with you all a little bit about something we've talked around, and show you what we're trying to do to actually implement something to help homeowners who are not part of an official MPART investigation to better understand what potential exposures are out there for them so that they can make good decisions themselves, and what options there might be if they're concerned about exposures when they're not part of an MPART investigation and may never be. And I know this is something that AJ and several of you have been concerned about, that we do something, proactively, as it will, to actually get some information out there. And so what we did, and again, so I think this is all part of a bigger story, so to speak. Our job is to, educate the public. That's what we want to do. And so I've kind of laid out here not only to help them understand what their risks are and how to reduce them, but I think there's a couple of other big policy questions out there that, we're not prepared to get at yet, but at some point in time, I think this has become a bigger issue. Is, whose responsibility is it when, there are one-offs out there, for lack of a better way to say it, where there is some contamination and that they have to come up with an alternative. And are there some other things that we can do proactively? I think like New Jersey, for example, has passed a law whenever, home ownership transfer, changes hands, that you have to do tests for PFAS just to see if there's any PFAS there. And again, these homes might otherwise never be tested for PFAS. So, but those are a couple of policy questions. But I think first and foremost, we need to be focused on just informing residents and, you know, and really kind of the why are we doing this now? I think it's kind of a logical evolution of what we're doing in MPART. You know, clean water continues to be a priority, and we're going to have MCLs soon. And, you know, so it continues to be in the forefront, and more people are having questions, especially people who aren't part of these different, you know, investigation areas that we've got across the state. And so anyway, that's why we want to get this thing off dead center. And so just to fill you in a little bit on the process that we've been going through, is we had an initial brainstorming session with DHHS and Eagle and some local health departments just to say, okay, what should this look like? What's needed? And coming out of that, it's a draft outline that I'll kick back to the group. But the idea is to develop a plan for what we need to make available to the public. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Get the materials drafted and then get that back to you. I think you're going to be key to this, to get some input on, you know, what it is that we're putting together, what's needed to make sure that we put the best possible foot forward on this. And we're also going to go back to the MPART Local Public Health Advisory Committee. They also get together with the MPART agencies every month for feedback just like this, and then something that we can implement within a reasonable time frame. And all right, and so I've lost control. I saw someone trying to take, there it is. All right, so so key elements though of the I think what we should be putting together, and I haven't got it all on paper yet, is, and AJ's familiar with this, is some sort of a platform where people can put in their information on where they're located and then get some feedback on, are there some known sources out there that you know, and what do we know about those known sources? And it might just kick them right back to what the information we have on the MPART website. One thing that came out of this conversation though that's critical and we're lacking right now is we need local groundwater flow maps for the counties, and local health, you know, seconded that, you know, said, yes, you know, we really need to understand if there is a source, who might be impacted. You know, we need to get out there that PFAS 101. What are PFAS? What are the health effects of them? As well as, and again, we're talking about one-stop shopping here. Information on residential wells and some of the issues and concerns with residential well construction before and now. And if people do have concerns about risk, evaluating their options for alternate water. And also talk a little bit about the analytical side of drinking water, you know, and you know, make sure people understand the importance of accurate testing and how do you interpret the results. You know, we have local health and we have state toxicologists, for example, as resources. If someone wants to understand the result and what it might mean, make sure that information is available to them. And also to understand, what do you expect from, you know, MPART and your local health department if you get a result. And it was, we also had a really good conversation on the need to explore different formats. And I can't remember who it was from which health agency mentioned that they had a lot of success dealing, putting information out via videos, especially in communities that where English was not their first language. So, and to, you know, bring things to a very simple 5th grade reading level. Some of our information is perhaps technical, and I think necessarily so, but whatever we put together for, you know, this residential well information initiative, to put that out there as something that's a much simpler, easy to read, and then if people need to dive deeper, they can. So I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions or thoughts on that. Kelly, any hands raised?
Steve, I have a question.
Yeah.
Gail and I had spoke about coming into our community and kind of doing a, PFAS 101. Is there material, printed material that Eagle can supply some of us here on this advisory committee that we could go out into our communities and handouts, anything like that, as we are to reach out into the community and try to educate?
So the short answer is yes, we've got a lot of material, and I think the issue is what would be the best presentation of that. Let me ask a question out here because I can't see who all is on. Is Sue Manente on?
I am, Steve.
Hi, Sue. What are your thoughts on, providing some informational materials on PFAS that some of our members here could take out into their communities?
We do have several fact sheets. They are currently on the PFAS response website under the health tab. Those might be useful. We're also interested in learning more about what communities need and want. So learning more about whether our materials are effective. Are they answering the questions that people want to have answered? Are they at that fifth or at a low enough grade reading level? They're not at the 5th grade. And so we would like some feedback on those materials. But yeah, we do have those, and we have some copies that are available. We can mail some of those to you. Pam, you've probably seen those those materials, or you picked them up at the public meetings that we've attended and at CGO. So you might be familiar already.
Yes, and I did notice, Susan, that at those meetings, there was quite a few people that came through the door and were grabbing them. And I know as we proceed forward, Gail and I spoke about, we get a lot of questions. And I think in the public meetings or the community meetings, it's been so overwhelming, and the level of pre-anticipation or fear of what's coming next. I just think it's too much for them to grasp all at once. So Gail and I talked about, certainly here in the Otsego area, just doing baby steps with them. Keep it simple in the beginning, and as the the testing becomes more available and results come in, I think at least if they have just the basics, they'll be a little more prepared as to what does that all mean when Eagle and DHHS and maybe the EPA all come together for a meeting. Does that make sense, Susan?
It does make sense, Pam. And if you wouldn't mind, could you just gather a few of those thoughts and send me an email with some of your thoughts and suggestions? And that's the case for anyone who's on this call, because we have done I would say we've covered some ground, but there's certainly a lot more ground to cover as we move forward. And we have a little bit more staff now, so we might be able to spend more time investigating what the communities need and what we can provide that meets those needs.
I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam.
Yes, thank you. All right, other thoughts? Again, and really, I appreciate where Pam's coming from on, the impacted community side of things. But, this initiative here, too, is really going to be focused mostly on folks who may never be part of an impacted community, those million wells out there that may never get tested. And, making sure that we're providing some information to them as well.
And this is Sue again. That's another program that we're working on, just general well maintenance, and also including PFAS information statewide for people who may live or may not live near a PFAS site. So yeah, again, that feedback from you, Pam, and from others would be really helpful for that project as well.
I'd be happy to do that. Susan and Steve, one of the things that I've noticed as I've been out on the ground with Eagle as we've been doing water and soil sampling, a lot of the residents said to me, well, I'm not really concerned about it because I don't live near such and such address, that they know from the last or former community meetings. that maybe were homes of interest or there was elevated levels. So I think just having that basic knowledge, as Gail and I spoke about, you know, your neighbor may not test positive, but that doesn't mean you may not.
Right. Good point. Yeah, and our job is really to educate everybody. It's make sure everybody's informed with at least the basics. Yeah. So anyway, I appreciate, just, this brief, discussion here, and some of this stuff we may already have developed. Some of it might need to be revised, but the idea is to get it all in one location so that someone can go to the website and get this information to help them make good decisions too, or at least know who to ask for help. So appreciate that, and stay tuned. We're going to be presenting it back to you as this evolves, and we're going to need your help going forward.
Steve.
Yep.
Real quick, it's AJ.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for your work on this, and the rest of the folks at Eagle and DHHS in really looking into this more. With respect to PFAS 101, again, it seems like some of the stuff the Water Advocate is doing contains some of that type of information. I haven't had a chance to delve too deeply into it, but it looks like that's going to be at least the start of a good source of basic information along with these regional meetings. But my question is more specifically related to the legislature. If in fact we want to move forward on any significant effort of just either informing or maybe even hope a sampling program require funding.
We're losing you, AJ.
We get something like New Jersey. I'm sorry.
Is AJ still on?
I am.
I hear you now.
Okay. To the extent we get something like New Jersey that requires testing on sale of a property, that would also require legislative, action. Has anyone been speaking to folks in the legislature about the possibility of a private well information system and or mandatory testing?
Not yet. That has not been on our list yet, but I think it needs to be part of this conversation. Like I say, there's some policy questions that go along with this. And what I'd like to do is to be able to present, here's how we're going to address private well owners across the state. And it includes these elements. And we've already done what we can on some parts of it, like, what GIS, and, here's some information on PFAS. Here's some information on private wells, et cetera, and what you can do to protect yourself if you're concerned. But we're going to need to get local groundwater flow maps. And that was an initiative that we haven't been able to fund because we've been focused on getting well logic updated. And so we've only got one county, I think, where we've got these local groundwater flow maps. And so that's got to be part of the equation. And but then those policy questions too. And I think we say, here's another element that will make us successful is testing every time, a home changes ownership or something like that, and put it all out there as a package. And I think if we put it all in context, we might have a better opportunity to move this forward.
Excellent. And one final point, EPA now has required reporting of manufacturing facilities that are using PFAS, hopefully not spilling it, but, again, trying to inform people, if I'm right next door to a facility that's utilizing a lot of PFAS, I may want to have my well sampled. So it would be useful information to the extent that it becomes available to the state. And I think I see no reason why I shouldn't be, to include in the information system where these manufacturing facilities are located to allow people to perhaps test their own water as a result.
That's a really good point. The toxic release inventory and a lot of these other programs are community right to know, community awareness. And as we start getting that information, that's something that we can recognize as a resource too. No, good point.
Thanks, Steve.
Steve, Connie Boris has her hand up.
Hey, Connie.
Yeah, just a quick one. This discussion triggered a thought in my head on this. For those residential wells that are, say, out in the boonies, if there had been a fire and foam was used, then wouldn't that be one of the sites that should really be sampled for groundwater for that well, or not?
Well, I don't know necessarily that they would use that kind of foam for a household fire, but I'll defer if Kevin Selmeyer, the state fire marshal, is still on, if he wants to chime in. And Kelly, I can't see if Kevin's still on.
Mike Jury. Normally, for a structure fire, if they're going to use foam, it's normally a Class A foam. A Class B foam is safe for hydrocarbon fires or some type of a fire that has a hydrocarbon. But for a home fire, structure fire would be a Class A protein foam.
Okay, thanks.
No guarantee that they didn't use the other stuff, but
correct. If they have it and it was on the truck, they might have used it. So yeah, absolutely. But normally, if they had a choice, we would use a Class A protein-based foam.
Thank you.
All right. No, thanks for the question. All right. Well, that's kind of where we are today on that. Just want to jump ahead real quick because we're running out of time, and you can read this where we are in the municipal airport grants. We didn't spend all the money, and we're looking at trying to get some additional proposals out there. I don't know if anybody has any questions on these grants, but these are all to investigate PFAS contamination at the Part 139 airports that would have been required to have AFFF at some point in time under FAA regulations. And here's the ones. There was an announcement that you all likely saw on who are the current awardees. We don't have grants signed yet because they're working with Eagle to iron out some of the investigation provisions, but we're hoping to, issue some more. So anybody have any questions on these? All right, I think I saw Brian or Hal might have been on from MDOT. If you want to chime in with anything else, please feel free.
Aaron Weed wants to know, what about the Wirtsmith Airport grant?
Wirtsmith, okay. And I'm not familiar with that one in particular. We might have to follow up with you on that unless any of our staff.
Mike again. I'm not aware that Wordsmith submitted one.
Yeah, Steve, this is Brian. Oscoda's not included in that 139 delineation, so they are not in the program as of now.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Is that helpful, Aaron? Okay. Real quick here to note is just the Great Lakes PFAS Summit that we keep talking about. This was hopefully going to have been an opportunity for an in-person meeting of this group, and scheduled for the end of October this year. And this is the one that grew out of our Treatment Technologies Roundtable. We just had to make the call this past week that this is going to have to go to a virtual format, given all the concerns over the pandemic still. And so we're in the process of looking for options to perhaps have more days and less time each day, perhaps a full week. We've changed some of our other meetings that would have been normally scheduled for 2 days to like a 4-day format with fewer hours each day. Do some pre-recorded sessions, perhaps still try to get the keynote speakers in and try to make sure we're providing opportunities for a dialogue and a Q&A with the speakers and any of the attendees. And so this is going to cover everything from PFAS 101, health effects, to treatment technologies, things that we're learning and studying, research. We had a really good agenda in the works there, and just really can't support that going forward given the current pandemic situation. But we're going to make it a really good event. We're looking for participation at least amongst the Great Lakes states and Canadian provinces. And so there should be more coming out on the marketing side of this shortly, after we've really honed in on the type of format that we're going to have going forward. So, and I think this group too, you should think of their opportunities. We still want to try to make sure that we do something associated with that, you know, you know, but again, I was really hoping we could have gotten you all together as part of this, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. All right, this just really quick highlight the fact that I thought you'd be interested to know that we are working with EPA's Office of Research and Development. It seems like I was on 3 calls with them over the past 3 weeks. They're active members of our Treatment Technologies Roundtable, and they've reached out to us because under the National Defense Authorization Act, they've got to come up with some guidance on PFAS treatment and destruction, not just management techniques or disposal techniques. And they've got some deadlines like yet this year, so they came right to Michigan because they know we've got this Treatment Technologies Roundtable, and so we're having at least every other month conversations with them and sharing back and forth some of the research and studies going on. And also had a really good conversation with them on drinking water analytical methods. As you know, Michigan has, you know, been, you know, doing a lot of testing in drinking water, and there might be an opportunity for our labs to participate in a multi-lab study to validate additional methods that EPA is considering and they're developing right now. Because right now, the only validated methods that they have primarily for drinking water, the method 537.1 and then a method 533. So anyway, good discussions there. And tomorrow I'll find out more about, this is their title, Cool Ways to Destroy PFAS. They've got a challenge out there. They want the states, they've identified Michigan and Colorado to start to help them review some proposals. And there's a funder out there to do, you know, get some information on PFAS destruction technologies. So thought you would appreciate knowing that. And so foam data. I think what I'm going to do here, instead of, I'm not going to read this off to you, and being mindful of time, we are just trying to, you know, get better information out on the web when it comes to the surface water foam. We've talked about the sampling programs and whatnot. Mike Jury is on here along with Kelly to really talk a little bit about, you know, the data. How do we present the data? And so, Kelly, do you want to kind of take over and show the current table that we're trying to figure out the best way to present? There you go. Perfect. Take it away.
So this is for Mike. Mike, do you want to explain this?
Sure. So the group has been asking us for a list of the data for foam. So we had a spreadsheet that we had worked on internally just to throw foam data in to take a look at. And with your request to be able to see foam data from across the state, along with the AECOM report when it comes out, we were thinking about what would be the best way to present the data. So what we're working on right now is this spreadsheet, and you'll see it'll have a district name, and then there'll be the county that foam, the date it was collected, what body of water did we sample it from, and if we have some type of a location to give you an idea where that was at. Then if you go across, you'll see that there's a listing of the different types of PFAS compounds. It'll have the initials and then of course the name across the top for all those. Now there'll be a bunch of them because the technology has improved since we started back sampling foam in 2017, and boy, it sure seems like it's been forever, but it hasn't been. So you'll see some of these compounds that probably aren't familiar to you, and we've been able to add them in the last couple months. So there'll be some columns with nothing in them. PFOS and PFOA, we did that before because that was our criteria, 70 parts per trillion, either singularly or in combination for PFOS and PFOA. is that still usable for you folks? Is that something that you would want? So that's one question. Total PFAS, I think certainly that's something that everybody kind of wants to see. How many analytes were analyzed? So we started out, we did maybe 14 or 16. Now we're up to 41. Sample ID is, there's the foam sample ID. That's out of the sheet that we keep track of. What lab was that at, what work order, and the data, when did we put it to the table. But the main thing that I'm concerned about and looking for your input is the PFOA plus PFOS really needed for you? Is that something you would want to see, being that the criteria will change to singular for PFOA, PFOS? So something to think about. And I see Dan Brown's hand is up. Dan?
Yeah, so the PFAS, PFOA combined number is still useful to us just because, of all the places that have sampled, that gives us, the baseline that we can compare things to. It's a good reference level, if nothing else.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, it's certainly useful to have that number just because so many people have been thinking about that now for at least a little while. Definitely for us, the total PFAS, there is growing interest in that as more groups and scientists start thinking about class-based protections or subclasses of these chemicals. So certainly the total relative to either individual compounds or PFAS, PFOA, certainly all useful.
Okay, great. Thank you. Because in some ways I was thinking, who cares? But I'm glad to know that. Then we'll keep it. Just having one person saying that it's a positive thing is a good deal. So what's holding us up a little bit on this is that the data that we have on all this is in a different format that AECOM has in what we call the EQUIS database. And so they have to get the data set up that can be plugged into here because it's in a little different format than this format. So they are working on that, and we will get that transferred over. Plus, I have to do quality control on it once it's in there. There are a lot of data points, and we need to make sure that we don't mess up somehow and get things in there that are wrong. So once I get that information from AECOM in here, we'll go ahead and do quality control and then get that out on the web. So the goal is for it to be out on the web. And as for a date for that, I don't know, because it will take time to do the quality control work. And unfortunately, I have other jobs that I do in my own district. So we'll get on it and get it done as fast as possible.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. And I tried to get control here and didn't do very good the first time. Oh, there we go. All right. Any other questions for Mike? I know this is part of a bigger effort to, get better information out on the web, so I appreciate that. All right. So next, let's get to our subcommittees. And first one, Ken, just talk a little bit about where we are with the engaging the public subcommittee, and I'll advance the next slide after folks see here. This is basically your core team. And here's the slide you gave us to talk from for a few minutes.
And we're really piggybacking on a lot of the work that AJ's doing with website and all that other discussion you had earlier. So we are in the initial stages, but it will be essential for our engagement with the public once the MCLs become official. So we've been doing some talking and some planning, but officially haven't had a whole sit-down core team meeting yet because COVID is just not being, it's relentless. It's not.
Right.
Remote meetings to me are difficult. And once the public engagement starts, that's probably going to be in a remote setting as well. And that'll even make it more difficult.
Got it. Well, and I appreciate, your leadership and getting this moving and like I say, we've got some a great support team behind you with Sue and Stephanie, over in the in DHHS. And so, I think, what we'd like to do too is, keep these updates from you all as you get your legs in what you're working on. Just keep these as part of the agenda, and perhaps between now and September, since we're going to skip the August meeting, if nothing else, since many of you may have this time slot on your calendars anyway, is maybe take advantage of that for a brief conversation through this sort of a meeting format. It's not ideal, but maybe it'll be helpful.
And that would be a good thing to do for our group come the second Tuesday in August.
Perfect. Well, I know Sue and Stephanie are listening in here, so maybe they're taking notes, because I know she offered to help get this started. So thank you very much. Any questions for Ken? All right. Thank you. And so we've got the web review subcommittee with AJ, and here's the rest of his team, and they've already met. So I'm going to bounce on to just this little placeholder slide here. And AJ, anything you'd like to add right now for where we are?
Just real quick, I want to thank everyone from the state that listened to a lot of input that Shelley and I had. We literally went page to page and offered a number of suggestions. The basic gist was that there's so much information on here that expecting doesn't have a scientific background or a knowledge of PFAS to the right page is very difficult. So what we need to do is to have a system where information is provided to the user when they enter their location. And we've talked about before, they could enter an address and get a little report back saying, this is the closest of the 140 sites near you, or these are the closest 3 to provide people, which as you use this may not be impacted at all. And that's one of the purposes of this system. If you're hundreds of miles away, you could presumably breathe a little bit easier than those that are maybe right next door to a site. A system where information is pushed to the user rather than expecting the user to move on. Sessions from Bill and Shelley, including maybe information on a regulatory outline, what are the regulatory laws, since that's very difficult, medical information to the extent we have it from DHHS. Shelley suggested more information on potential remediation technologies. So that's all information that we made. I think some really good suggestions, and we all recognize that it's nothing that can be implemented immediately. But I mean, some of the suggestions we had were actually implemented as we were speaking. So we're very encouraged by that and want to continue to work with MPART, and I guess now with the Water Advocate, to make this information as useful as possible to anyone that wants access to it.
Awesome. All right, any questions for AJ? All right, well, thank you very much. All right, and I know I've kind of let us run over here, but just real briefly, June 9th draft summary was shared. If you've got any comments, suggested edits to that, get them back to Kelly by the 17th. Otherwise, just like the last one we shared, they'll become final unless you guys have some, issues or, questions on those that we need to fix. So, and then subcommittee's progress, let's keep up with this and keep this on the agenda future meetings are on the calendars, Teams format for both October and September and October. And, hopefully this, I think this went pretty smooth, and, especially compared to how I first started out dealing with the Teams format. So we'll warm up to it, and I, appreciate everybody switching over from the previous one. This might offer us easier opportunities for dialogue, and then Jim Ostrowski doesn't have to get us all set up all the time, even though we love all the work and help from Jim. And appreciate you staying on tonight, Jim. So let's jump into the any round robin. I'm going to try to get out of this screen here so that I can, maybe I'll give it up as soon as I talk about how smooth this was going, all right? And so anyhow, and Bill, keep laughing at me. I'm not good at this. Old dogs, right? And Kelly's laughing at me too, but that's okay. So anybody have any announcements, anything we need to get on everybody's radar? All right, Dave Wynn.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I guess the comment I would like to make is, it was said about 10 minutes ago that when you talked about the airports, that Wordsmith wasn't included as part of that. It seems that everybody in the Ascota area, Wordsmith, is on an island of their own. If you remember, Steve, a couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting and we talked about Eagle being more involved with the Air Force and helping us getting some of these remedial actions done. It seems like we're doing things on our own. We're not on any kind of grants, we're not on anything, and it's getting frustrating at the fact that everybody else is getting things, and Ascota, who's one of the first PFAS sites in the state, is trying everything they need to do and talking to everybody they need to in order to get information or get somebody, either an Eagle or somebody, to do something. And this is getting frustrating. So that's, and then also the other comment I want to make is that what also was said in that meeting 2 weeks ago, and I'm hope Sue Vanetti's still on the phone call, was that Aaron Weed had asked for information relative to current well testing or some data so that he could begin to work to try to apply for grants for city water because we need it. Aaron has not been contacted by anyone other than Mike Neller, only to find out what information he needed. And that information was given 2 weeks ago. And I'd like to know where that is as well.
Okay, and I don't see that Sue is still on here. I remember the request, and I know there was some concerns about making sure that the department did not release any personal identifiable information. We can't do that, and DHHS can't. And so I won't speak for where we are in the process, but I know that was one of the concerns, and whether or not there could be something else that might be equally as helpful to Aaron without giving him, home by home, and have to go through and redact data to get him something that might be helpful. So,
Steve, I know that, but my point in saying is it's been 2 weeks and not even one person has called Aaron to say we're working on it, we haven't done it, or anything.
Okay. No, I appreciate that, and the follow-up is important. And
it is important. When you talk about transparency, well, I'm getting really frustrated because it's like the people in Ascota are on an island of their own. We were told in that meeting that the RAB, our community RAB, needs to fight with the Air Force to figure out who's going to do the remedial action. Where I think MPART, or I think Eagle should be part of that. They're the state's environmental group, and they need to be involved in this.
Hey Dave, this is Sue. I am still on the call, and I know it's been, it was a topic that is being discussed here, so let me follow up on that and see who can get back to you with information. I know we haven't wrapped up the sampling yet, so we wouldn't have all that information to share. But I will share your concern and request that somebody get back to you and Aaron, okay?
I would appreciate somebody get back with Aaron Weed, who's the township supervisor that requested the information.
Okay.
Please.
Got it.
All right, thank you. And I think Sandy had her hand up too.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yay! I love it when technology works.
I
I was just going to suggest, because I think they're bringing up a pretty good point about Oscoda sort of being left in the dust here. One thing I wondered, and I thought we talked about this at the last meeting, is if we could start our meetings with follow-up from the previous meeting so that we don't lose this stuff. I think we had talked about that last meeting about the concerns that Wayne County had about there's possibly being sites that are being missed, and we were going to follow up on that, and then again with Oscoda this week. So I just wonder if we could look at adjusting that agenda so that we start with follow up from the previous meeting. So we don't let stuff, it's just too easy when you only meet once a month to lose sight of stuff.
Yeah, no, I appreciate what you're saying, and you know, even if it's, you know, more local, and like Mike Alexander following up with Connie, and whether that was or wasn't sufficient, and but maybe if nothing else to identify, well, here's some of the follow-up items from the previous meeting, not that we have to spend a lot of time on them, but show how it was done. And I will say, you know, there are instances, and we all recognize this, that if it gets, you know, very specific to individual communities, you know, and you know, I think this group as a whole, you know, may not be as interested in those very, very specific community issues, although we haven't taken anything off of the table. You know, just recognize that, you know, we will do what we can to make sure that we're being as responsive to specific community concerns always.
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't want to get lost in the weeds in every community, but you know, I think one of the benefits of this is maybe some communities can learn from others. So, you know, Belmont figured out a way to let us know where hotspots were without giving out identifying information. So if Eagle could do it here in Belmont, there's got to be a way to do it in Oscoda, for example.
Yeah.
But I think it may just be helpful for everybody on MPART to be able to hear that here was how we followed up on the issue in Wayne County. And that's a 2-minute conversation and then move on. I think it just helps us all feel like we're making progress and not just reviewing forms. So that's just my 2 cents worth.
No, that's a good point. And maybe what we'll explore a little bit too is perhaps including in the meeting summary, depending on the timing of when it gets out to you, is here's what was done, and as well, so that you can see that, and if anybody has questions on that, and we can make sure we can cover it, but at a minimum, it'll be in the sing-along from the previous meeting too. Okay. Awesome. Any other questions, comments, announcements? I don't see any more hands raised. Everybody said, Steve, we're already 15 minutes past. So with that, I think, you know, we'll give everybody what's left of your evening back and say thank you very much. It was very good to see you all and hear from you. Appreciate your participation in MPART here. It's very helpful to us, and look forward to continuing with you. And unless there's anything else for the good of the order, did I forget anything, Kelly?
You did not.
All right. All right. Hey, thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.